When the outbreak of the Second World War was heralded across the nation on the 3rd of September 1939, few could imagine that the war would go on for so long, take so many casualties, and become such a nationwide effort. And for the citizens of Liverpool, few would have known that they themselves would become a key target of the German Luftwaffe, or that the Allied operations that were plotted here would be crucial in playing their part in winning the Second World War. At the time, Liverpool was the main terminus for trade coming in from Canada and America, handling around a third of the whole of the UK's imports. During the war, an average of 4 convoys a week travelled across the Atlantic and docked here, bringing a cargo of everything from wool, wheat and butter to metals, such as aluminium, copper and lead. This port became a lifeline for our island country, bringing in things that we couldn't produce here, keeping wartime Britain on its feet. Liverpool was a stronghold on the UK's Atlantic coast that the invading forces were desperate to break, and the Battle of the Atlantic began moments after war was declared, with the Nazi Luftwaffe targeting Liverpool's docks and merchant shipping convoys incessantly. And during the May Blitz of 1941, not only were the docks pummeled, but enormous damage was caused to the city and residential areas on both sides of the Mersey. The results were devastating. 4,000 people were killed, 4,000 seriously injured, and around 10,000 homes were destroyed. And it was from here on the banks of the Mersey that the fight back really began. 3 miles across the water in Birkenhead, over 100 warships were built from scratch and sent out to do battle in the Atlantic. From submarines to battleships, Kemmel-led shipbuilders on average turned out 1 ship every 20 days. And famous vessels like HMS Prince of Wales and the huge aircraft carrier HMS Ark Royal were launched from here. But for Liverpool's merchant shippers, the biggest challenges were still to come. By 1940, the Nazi occupation had spread across Europe, and the German Kriegsmarine were able to mobilise the stealth-like U-boats known as wolf packs against Allied shipping convoys. Jack Brotheridge was a 20-year-old carpenter on board the cargo ship Oteo when he set sail from Liverpool into waters haunted by deadly German U-boats.
You left the Mersey, you'd meet ships coming from the Clyde, and altogether before you entered the Atlantic properly, there could be 30, 40, 50 ships. Now the Royal Navy would have perhaps three escorts, that's all. But once you got into the Atlantic, about 100 miles from Ireland, the ships were going to different parts, so they all broke up. And that was when the U-boats used to try and get you, like. The U-boats were numerous. I wouldn't be surprised if they run into the hundreds in the North and South Atlantic. There was nowhere where you could say, well, there's no U-boats in this area. You couldn't say that.
With the merchant navy suffering such heavy losses, Liverpool was really feeling the full weight of the war. The defeat of the U-boat threat to the Allied supplies was now critical in preventing a German invasion of the UK, and the military commanders needed a base close to where the battle was being fought. And it was here in the early part of 1941 that the headquarters of Britain's Western Approaches Command was established to effectively plan and put into operation what Churchill coined the Battle of the Atlantic. The location of the HQ was top secret, and even the WAFs and the Wrens who worked here had to use separate entrances and were only allowed in specific quarters, just in case they were ever captured by the enemy and forced to tell them what they knew. This building was known as the fortress to the people who worked here, due to its extensive reinforced concrete in the basement. The walls are 3 feet thick. It's bomb-proof and gas-proof, and it covers an area of 50,000 square feet. There are approximately 100 rooms down here, and this being the most important, the map room. Here, underneath the busy streets of Liverpool's city centre, commanders from the Royal Navy, RAF and frequently Churchill himself worked with Allied forces to monitor the enemy vessels and plan their counter-attack. This was the nerve centre of the Battle of the Atlantic, where thousands of square miles of ocean were plotted on a map, and the fates of thousands of ships were determined by a set of coordinates.
As you got further into the Atlantic, eventually there'd be a ship hit with it. You know, the U-boats would get in and get one, bang, and the next thing is the ship sinking. And then there would be depth charges getting dropped. But the U-boats, of course, had only just showed themselves, torpedoed and then sunk, you see. So you weren't really aware of where the enemy was. I saw ships get hit, and nobody could stop to pick anyone up.
But the Western Approaches Command had their own new tactics. The introduction of aircraft carriers, like HMS Ark Royal, and very long-range aircraft helped them close what was known as the Mid-Atlantic Gap, where the merchant ships had been left vulnerable to German attack.
And from up here, this is where the Commander-in-Chief, Admiral Sir Max Horton, would have sat overseeing the entire operation. And you can just imagine the atmosphere. Men and women working tirelessly around the clock, plotting every move here in the map room. Now, each one of those little pieces of wood down there on that map board represents around 20 vessels and hundreds of men, many of them merchant seamen from Liverpool. Admiral Horton held his nerve. And by 1943, the U-boats were on the back foot. And that's thanks largely due to the heroic work of the special support groups, the frigates and the destroyers that escorted these convoys backwards and forwards, and all of their routes were meticulously plotted down there on that board.
One of the most successful of the convoy support groups was based at Liverpool's Gladstone Dock. Under the command of legendary Captain Frederick Johnny Walker, known as the U-boat killer for his many victorious anti-submarine missions. He is credited with sinking the most U-boats during the campaign and using innovative methods that tipped the Battle of the Atlantic over to Allied victory. By May 1943, the U-boats had been called off by the German Naval Command. Although the Battle of the Atlantic continued until the end of the war, the Nazi campaign had been greatly weakened, and crucially, the vital trade lifelines to the UK had been kept open.
I always felt we'd win it, and I never thought we'd lose it. But it took time, like. But we did it, and the job is over, like, yeah.
While the Battle of the Atlantic may have been a resounding success, the casualties were devastatingly heavy. 30,000 merchant seamen lost their lives. The battle may have been played out hundreds of miles at sea, but the seeds of victory were sown right here. The people of Liverpool should feel justly proud of the part they played in preventing a German invasion at great personal cost.